You are listening to the Final Say Radio Show, a Rappaport Media production, with your host Brett Rappaport and co-host John Rappaport.
Without further ado, I want to welcome our first guest today, Justin Danhof, Esquire, who is the General Counsel and Director of the Free Enterprise Project that is part of the National Center for Public Policy Research. Justin, welcome to the Final Say Radio Show. This is Brett Rappaport.
Hey,
it's a pleasure to have you.
Great to be with you, Brett.
Well, I like what you guys are working on here, and it's interesting how the whole everything ties together here. Now, here it is. Johnson & Johnson, of course, has an annual meeting, just as every corporation of this size should be having. And now you attended this meeting, and this was yesterday?
I believe it was this morning, actually.
Oh, this morning. Okay. GE's meeting was yesterday. Sorry. So
yeah, they've been running together for me too. Don't worry.
So at this meeting, the heart of the issue is the fact that a group by someone that we're very familiar with, Van Jones, called Color of Change, put a lot of pressure on Johnson & Johnson to stop working with the American Legislative Exchange Council. Now tell us first, if you can, what the council does and what kind of pressure came upon it and why we should be so concerned about this.
Sure. So, yeah, a little backstory is important to this full narrative. So, sure. The American Legislative Exchange Council, which goes by ALEC, they are generally work on state-level issues that advance free market causes. So they work with legislatures and corporations primarily. It's a membership organization, so state legislatures from both parties come and they're members of the American Legislative Exchange Council. ALEC works on legislation to advance free market causes. So they, to increase business competitiveness, to lower corporate taxes, to reduce regulation at the state level on companies trying to do business within a state's borders. So that's a really broad stroke of what ALEC does. And so rewind about a year and a half ago is when all of this started. Color of Change, Van Jones, they are essentially a racial bully, okay? And they see that the American Legislative Exchange Council is advancing two kinds of state-level legislation that they disagree with. The first was the so-called Stand Your Ground legislation made famous by the Trayvon Martin incident down in Florida. And a very important piece of context here is that ALEC had nothing to do with the law that was written in Florida. ALEC, it's true, worked on Stand Your Ground laws, but they never worked with anybody in Florida on that law. So that's a key point to note. Second thing that they worked on was state-level voter ID laws that some on the far left consider to be racist, even though the Supreme Court has declared that voter ID laws at the state level are constitutional and that states have a duty to protect their citizens from voter fraud, and one tool to protect their citizens from voter fraud is voter ID. That's one issue about voter ID. The second issue is that large majority of Republicans, Independents, and Democrats all support voter ID, as do a large majority of white, Hispanic, and black Americans. So voter ID has broad public support, but Color of Change doesn't like it, and they consider it racist. So about a year and a half ago, they started online petitions, and they presented them to the boards at many companies, large and small, all across the country that were members of the American Legislative Exchange Council. And they have to date, just by doing this and running a few radio advertisements tying certain companies to ALEC and claiming that this is some sort of racist connection, 44 major companies have dropped out of the American Legislative Exchange Council just because of Van Jones's group, their race baiting and race bullying, which is incredible. So advancing the story a little bit forward, at last year's annual meeting of Johnson & Johnson shareholders, I actually stood up and at the time thanked their CEO for not cowering to the pressure of ALEC. to the pressure to leave ALEC from Color of Change. Well,
right.
That fell on deaf ears because in June 2012, Johnson & Johnson dropped their membership in ALEC. They were a member that sat on a very important board called the Private Enterprise Board because Color of Change started running radio advertisements near their headquarters in New Jersey and also in Washington, D.C., once again deceptively claiming that somehow this was a racist connection and a racist deal. And another important historical note on all of this is by the time Johnson & Johnson left the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC had decided on their own that it wasn't worth the headache anymore, and they stopped working on voter ID issues altogether. They stopped working on stand your ground legislation altogether. But yet, Color of Change is still out there claiming that ALEC is this terrible boogeyman, and and corporations should leave them, and legislatures should drop their membership. So this really gets to the heart of the matter, doesn't it? It's not really about voter ID. It's not really about stand your ground. This is about a liberal effort to defund what they see as a free market / conservative cause. It's really, really going at the heart of the financing for right-wing groups. So it really, really exposes what Color of Change is all about. So fast forward all the way to this morning. I stand up at the Johnson & Johnson annual meeting of shareholders, and I ask the CEO to explain the rationale, considering that ALEC was no longer working on the issues that were, supposedly hot button and controversial, and that you are a Fortune 500 company, one of the wealthiest pharmaceutical companies in the world, and you back down to a tiny racial mouthpiece in Van Jones and his group. This is not a winning corporate strategy to back down every time a liberal complains about something that you're doing. You will become a tool of the left. You have put a big kick me sign on your back, and the left is going to keep coming, and they're going to keep kicking. Well, I hate to say what happened, but Mr. Gorski, the CEO, Alex Gorski of Johnson & Johnson, firmly stood with his decision. He claimed personal ownership over the decision to drop ALEC, and said he would not be reconsidering membership, and that somehow ALEC no longer stood up to the Johnson & Johnson credo, which, if you can go on the Johnson & Johnson website and read, basically talks about best practices in pharmacy and best business practices. It's clear to those who can see that they were race-baited, they succumbed to it. Perhaps they're slightly embarrassed by it, but for now, they've got a big kick-me sign on their back because Gorski is brand new to the CEO position, and one of the very first decisions he made was to cower to the pressure of race bullies and leave ALEC. So, left-wing groups and left-wing loons are going to start coming out of the woodworks and demanding whatever policy positions they want out of Johnson & Johnson, and they'll likely get them.
Yeah, this is a very sad case, and I'm glad that you guys are working so diligently on this. To me, anytime an organization comes out and tries to pressure a company into making a decision, they're really trying to suppress the free speech of a company. Because to me, the best practice is if you don't like the way a company operates or you don't like their products and you simply don't buy that company's products or do business with them. But to, pressure them into doing things that takes away the idea of what this nation's about. But coming back a little deep, further or earlier into your story here, even if ALEC was pushing for, still pushing for voter ID laws and things of that nature, I don't understand what the issue is because it has nothing to do with suppressing somebody's vote. I mean, when you consider the fact that we can't drive without a driver's license, we can't fly without showing an ID, you can't purchase many goods such as cigarettes or alcohol or cleaning products, depending on where you are. When you go to a hospital, one of the first things they ask you for is an ID or your insurance card. When you visit your doctor, you have to show an ID. A lot of buildings that you go into. I mean, it's it's countless. So I have no idea why they would even have a problem with the idea of a voting ID to begin with. But then again, if any country should believe in free markets, and I know you guys support this and do a great job of doing so, it's this country. So how could Johnson & Johnson, one of our historic companies, act in this manner? To me, it's very discouraging, actually, on a corporate level.
Well, it's incomprehensible, and a larger picture, panning back, what we see is the media. Just think about the Occupy Wall Street movement for a second, okay? What we see is the mainstream media that have presented corporations for years as these right-wing bullies who are out to make profits, right? Corporations are bad. Somehow, they're all evil. All the banks are evil. And this mantra has been going on for, 35 years in the mainstream media. And so there's this very, very false image out there because many American corporations are actually stuffed to the gill with their boardrooms of very, very far left individuals. Many college professors and, college provosts sit on boards of major companies. One of Al Gore's best friends sits on the board of Walmart, and Walmart's actually made some very left-wing decisions in their public policy arena in the last 4 or 5 years. And the one example that I want to give folks who are like, Justin, what are you talking about? These corporations, they're all right-wing. Well, no, they're not. In 1993 and 1994, when this country and the conservatives in this country fought and defeated Hillary Care, one of the biggest allies on the right was the pharmaceutical industries. Through their trade association known as PhRMA, they worked diligently and they helped defeat Hillary Care and killed it where it stood. Well, fast forward 16 years later in 2010, when all of the Obamacare debates were going on, if you saw any commercial with those doctors in the white coats all supporting Obamacare, those were all funded by the same group, PhRMA. This is the Johnson & Johnsons of the world. This is the Pfizers of the world. This is the Mercks of the world. Within a span of 16 years, left-wing individuals and left-wing organizations managed to push one of the largest trade associations, being PhRMA, in this country that far to the left. They did a complete 180 on the issue, and they spent the second most amount of money on Obamacare, only behind the unions. So we have a very leftist corporate culture that's very hard to fight. And I say that because I've been to shareholder meetings for the last 3 years, and I've been to any range of companies you can think of, from John Deere to Disney. And almost to a man, I am the only person who brings up conservative and free market causes at these meetings. Almost everyone else is a PETA individual, a Greenpeace individual, or an Occupy member or something else, and they have the ear of the board. They have the ear of the executives. And through time, it's a slow-playing strategy, but through time, look how very successful they were in turning the pharmaceutical companies into stooges for Obama. That's why the free market voice is very important at these shareholder meetings, and that's why I encourage all your listeners. You guys have stocks out there. You guys are, you're share owners in companies. If you, pick up the paper and see, like Wall Street Journal today, big headline, GE lending will no longer give to any gun shops. Well, you know what? If you're a member of the NRA, get your butt to next year's GE shareholder meeting and let them know about it.
That's a great point. And when I look at this story and I think about how much Johnson & Johnson has benefited from our tax dollars, I mean, how many different divisions that they have that, either contracts or business, certainly enriches the shareholders of Johnson & Johnson. I mean, they're not successful because they don't have relationships with, people in Washington or other, the state governments and whatnot. And then when you look at GE, which is another company you discussed in your press release here, GE benefits greatly from a lot of things in government programs and subsidies for various things. And
they got $100 million just out of the stimulus alone.
Right. I mean, here we are. I'm sorry. I'm listening all morning about the sequester and having to cancel a Fleet Week in New York because which they say, could bring upwards of $20 million to the New York City economy. And I'm thinking to myself, here you are. You have one subsidy that could be what was it, $100 million a year?
Well, $100 million GE got out of just the stimulus, but yearly who knows how much they did.
I mean, so when you look at the numbers that go to these corporations and then that they're going to act in this manner, to me it's like, I don't know. You understand. We have a lot of issues here, and it's being driven by a small amount of people who just happen to have the right tactics.
Well, yes, and it's a hard fight to fight, but it's a fight worth fighting. And the reason I say it's hard is because when you get to this level of crony capitalism, when you get to the level of Jeffrey Immelt at General Electric, when you talk about Exelon taking $200 million out of the stimulus, we were also at the Exelon shareholder meeting on Tuesday in Baltimore, taking $200 million out of stimulus for a project they were already working on and already budgeted just because one of their board members is President Obama's basketball buddy. You can't make this stuff up. And it's hard to fight in that the crony capitalists are some of the most powerful corporations in the world. The American government is the strongest government in the world. And they combine together, and they will never hold themselves accountable. When's the last time you heard, a government agent, hold themselves accountable for something? Never. And these corporations, they're not going to go out there and hold themselves accountable. So it's really up to three unique sets of folks. It's up to the citizens, it's up to the shareholders, and it's up to the media. And we all know that, the lapdogs in the mainstream media aren't going to hold the administration accountable. And they're not going to hold these companies accountable if it's doing something that they support with the administration's money, which is really the taxpayers' money. And so it's really left to those, who want to speak truth to power in the media. It's up to folks like you on radio. It's up to, shareholders. So that's why I say, if you're a conservative guy or gal and you're picking up your Wall Street Journal and you're seeing, company X, Y, or Z that you have stock in somewhere in your portfolio, go to the meeting and let them hear it, because what's happening now is they're really only hearing it from the left, and so it makes it all that much easier for them to do the bidding of the left, because then they can just shut them up. So the right does a lot of things well. The conservatives do a lot of things well. One thing that we have not done well outside of the Tea Party movement is activism. Activism is really, really, the purview of the left in this country. And I think shareholder activism is one way that more conservatives could and should get involved.
Yeah, that's a good point. One thing I like to see is it would be great for more conservatives and just more individuals to participate because we all own stock in some company, whether it be through a mutual fund or just directly owned, and we should be going to meetings or, voting our proxies and making our voices heard. Because, you pointed out correctly. If we're not being heard, it's the other side that is, and it's not being counteracted. But I just want to mention one thing, because there was the rare event that happened this week of somebody falling on their own sword, and that was Max Baucus, who sees the writing on the wall of Obamacare.
Well, the writing on the wall has been, clear to those who want to see since the beginning. Granted, right. A lot of those folks never even read the bill, but apparently Max sees how it's playing out, and the script isn't going so well, is it?
No, not at all. Well, Justin, could you please give us your website so people could, first follow you, but also follow your group and then, of course, the center?
Sure. You can find all of our work at nationalcenter.org. That's the parent website. There's a big banner link right at the top. Sorry about that. For the Free Enterprise Project, and that'll be all of my work. And then we also have a blog, which is conservativeblog.org, and you can find the National Center on Facebook and Twitter.
Well, that sounds great. Justin, please do us a favor, because we certainly will announce it. In the future, if there are companies that we need to pay attention on issues such as this, please reach out to us. We will spread the word and see if we can't get people to at least try to attend some of these meetings and let our voices be heard.
That'd be wonderful. Thanks so much. Have a great afternoon.
Okay, thank you so much. Justin Danhof with the Free Enterprise Project at the National Center for Public Policy Research. Great work they're doing there. Great conversation. This is good stuff, folks. Good stuff happening. See, it's not all bad. I mean, what's going on is bad, but we've got good work.